Hello, dear learners. Today we are going to learn about subject-verb agreement. Now, what is subject-verb agreement? Every sentence must have a subject and a verb. When the subject is a noun phrase, we decide whether to use a singular or plural verb by looking at the head word, which means you must need to see that the subject is a plural or singular because you need to put an auxiliary verb, auxiliary singular verb or plural verb by looking at the head word. For example, the box of chocolate is on the table. Okay, here we mention only one box of chocolate. So we talk about a box of chocolate. So that's why we use singular auxiliary verb because we mention a singular thing, the box, right? This is the head word. The head word is singular. So that's why we use singular auxiliary verb. The second example is the boxes of chocolates are on the table. The head word, we indicate the plural, the boxes, right? That's why we put are, plural auxiliary verb in this sentence. As we mentioned, there are many boxes, which is plural. So that's why we use plural verbs in that sentence. So moving to the next slide. Singular subjects take singular verbs and plural subjects take plural verbs, which means if your subject is singular, then you should use singular verbs. But if your subject is plural, then you take plural verbs. Like how the tiger is asleep. We mention only one tiger. So that's why we write one singular verb, right? Because the tiger is a singular subject. But in the second example, the tigers are asleep. So here we mention many tigers, which is plural, right? So tigers is a plural thing, plural subject. So that's why we write plural verb. So now you can clear singular subject, tiger takes singular verbs is, and plural subject, tigers take plural verb are. The next thing, two or more subjects always takes a plural verb. What does that mean? It means if you write or talk about two subjects, then it should always take plural verbs. How? When you talk about Karen and Jane are visiting us this week. So here we talk about Karen and also talk about Jane. There is two subject, right? So these two subject takes plural verbs. So when we talk about two places or when we talk about two person, two things, then we should use or should take plural verbs. But when we talk about only one place or one person, then we need to put singular verbs. All right? This is very simple. And you also remember this thing while you are writing any essays or while we are speaking, right? This is very useful for speaking and writing. So next move in the next slide. Uncountable nouns take singular verb forms, even if it ends in S. What does that mean? Whenever we talk about any uncountable nouns, all right, like the uncountable nouns, and also it ends with S. There is lots of uncountable noun you can look for your book, and also you can look for search in the internet. So when we talk about any uncountable noun ending with S, it takes always singular verbs. For example, billiards. Okay, it's totally uncountable noun and end with S. We can say that, right? So what it takes? It takes singular verb, right? So whenever we talk about any uncountable noun ending with S, always take singular verb. And here is another example. Malaria, which is also an uncountable noun because you cannot count the disease like this. So malaria is a viral disease. So malaria is an uncountable noun and also it takes singular verb because you cannot count the disease. Here's another thing. We form the negative form of most verbs by adding doesn't or don't before the verb. Like whenever we talk about any negative things, then we should add doesn't or don't before the verb. For a singular subject, we add doesn't. Like if we talk about any singular item or any singular person, we add doesn't. And also change the verb to its base form. How? For example, Kate listened to traditional music. Kate is a singular, of course, and the verb also singular, right? So, but if we talk about this sentence in a negative way, how we can write? We can write in this way. Kate doesn't listen to traditional music, right? Because Kate, singular, and we use doesn't. We use doesn't in a singular subject. So that's why we put doesn't in this sentence to mention about negative things. There is another example. She has an electric guitar. She doesn't have an electric guitar. She also a singular subject, and it took doesn't because she is singular. So that's why we put doesn't. But why we put have in this sentence? Because we previously mentioned that change the verb to its base form, right? So whenever we talk about she has an electric guitar, but in the second time we mention in the negative form, she doesn't have an electric guitar. Moving to the next slide. For a plural subject and the singular pronoun I and you, we add don't, which means the singular pronouns I and you. In the past tense, we add don't, like you don't, I don't need this book, you don't need coffee. So in the pronoun I and you, we use don't. This is called singular pronouns. For example, my parents travel very often. But in the second, when we form this sentence in a negative way, then we use my parents don't travel very often. Why? We use don't because we mention a plural subject. My parents is a plural. All right. So in the previous line, we've learned that a plural subject and the singular pronoun. So whenever we talk about any plural subject or whenever we talk about any singular pronoun like I and you, we add don't in the past, in the present form. So my parents don't travel very often. This is a plural subject and we use don't. Here's another example. I have a washing machine. I don't have a washing machine as its singular pronoun. So we add don't with singular pronoun. Next item. For past tense, we use didn't instead of don't and doesn't. When we talk about in the present, we use don't and doesn't. But when we talk about didn't, when we talk about past time, so we mention didn't instead of using don't or doesn't, such as the motorist didn't notice the warning signs, right? Didn't means we talk about past tense. The motorist didn't notice. So in the past tense, when we use singular or plural subject, whatever we use, whatever it is plural or singular subject, we always use didn't in the past form. But in the present form, we always use don't and doesn't. In the same time, same way, we form the negative of the verb to be by changing to its or. Isn't or aren't. Isn't means is not. Aren't means are not. A singular subject takes isn't. Okay, this is the thing. Whenever we talk about any singular subject, then it takes singular auxiliary verb with negative words. And whenever we talk about plural subject and singular pronoun, then it takes aren't, which means are not. For example, this cheese is tasty. This cheese isn't tasty. We talk about singular subject, right? So that's why in a negative form, we use isn't. And also, you, singular pronoun. You are late for your appointment. And you aren't late for your appointment, which means you is a singular pronoun. And it takes plural auxiliary verb. And when we form it's in negative way, so we use are not, you aren't, right? So moving to the last slide. So this is the last slide for subject verb agreement. What is in it? If there are auxiliary verbs in addition to the main verb in a sentence, we can form a question replacing the first auxiliary verb before the subject, which means if you're making the sentence or if you're making your speech in a negative way or questionnaire, in a question way. So how you asked the question in this subject verb agreement form, you need to put the auxiliary verb in front of the sentence. to make it as a question form. For example, you have bought a good reference dictionary. Have you bought a good reference dictionary? What you can say? We put this auxiliary verb have in front of the sentence to make it as a question. So this is how you need to make a question in the subject-verb agreement form. Here's another example. Linda is applying for the job. Is Linda applying for the job? So this auxiliary verb we write in front of the sentence because we are asking something. So whenever you ask any question, you need to put the auxiliary verb in front of the sentence. All right? So this is the end of our subject-verb agreement. I hope you all understand. Thank you for listening to me.